What started as an ordinary morning on set became a moment nobody saw coming, where vintage respect dissipated to unadorned truth. You won't believe how one simple choice turned the whole thing around and taught us what true dignity really looks like. Press play to get in. It was supposed to be just another morning in the studio lights. Friendly chairs, gracious questions, some laughter before the next guest. But something deeper broke open on that day and opened up wounds not so easily closed and told truths not so softly spoken. What do you do when two individuals who at one time held respect for one another are now on opposite sides of principle and pride? How do we know when authentic inquiry turns into something else? And how do we react when dignity is questioned before millions? Let's walk carefully into this narrative, not merely of public showdown, but of private belief in the quiet courage it sometimes requires to simply walk away. Ask ChatGPT what transpires when one of Hollywood's most respected stars sits down for what should be a straightforward interview, to discover himself seated face to face with a host determined to dismantle him. What transpires when professionalism meets agendas and years of shared respect disintegrate before millions on live national television? Today, we're stepping into the heart of a moment that shocked millions when Samuel L. Jackson walked off the set of The View, leaving Whoopi Goldberg scrambling to regain control. This isn't just a story about a heated interview. It's a story about power, pride, and what happens when someone is pushed too far. If you haven't already, please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Because by the end of this story, you might find yourself wondering everything you ever thought you knew about daytime TV. Samuel L. Jackson rolled onto set that morning, looking for the usual routine. A few questions regarding his new movie, some chuckles, perhaps a bit of reflection on his storied career. But instead, he received something other than routine, something which would become one of the most memorable moments in the history of daytime television. The tension began even before the cameras came on. While Jackson made himself comfortable in his chair and adjusted his iconic Kangol hat, Whoopi Goldberg leaned in, her voice peaceful, near pleasant on the surface. But there was an undercurrent of bite. "So Samuel," she said just low enough that the audience couldn't hear, but clearly enough for him to catch every syllable, "I hope you are ready to have a real conversation today. Not just some fluff piece about your latest movie." Jackson raised an eyebrow, his relaxed expression tightening just a little. "I'm always ready for real conversation, Whoopi. That's never been a problem for me." "Good," she said, a smile creeping into place, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because I've got some questions that might make you uncomfortable. Hope you can handle it." Now Jackson has been in the game long enough to recognize when someone's attempting to get him off stride. He's walked his talk in meeting rooms packed with producers, critics, and suits. But this wasn't like that. This didn't feel like part of the act. It felt intimate, and he didn't yet know why. When the cameras finally went live, Whoopi's introduction seemed perfectly normal, at least to those watching at home. But Jackson could hear it, the subtle digs tucked into her words. She made sure to mention his age. She questioned whether he still had a place in modern Hollywood. And her comments about actors who refused to evolve with the times, those weren't just general statements. They had a target. "Today we've got Samuel L. Jackson with us," Whoopi announced, smiling at the crowd. "An actor who's been around for what, 4 decades now? Still making movies at 75, Whoopi continued, flashing a tight smile. "Which is impressive, though some might wonder if it's time to pass the torch to younger talent." Samuel L. Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, but he held his composure, his voice calm. "Ah, well, Whoopi," he replied calmly, "I'm still in business because people still want to see what I have to offer on the screen. When they stop attending shows, I'll stop showing up to make them." It was a crisp, dignified response, but Whoopi was not giving in. "Don't you think there's something to be said," she continued to push, "for knowing when to take a step back? I mean, how many more macho roles can one man play?" Her tone was changing now, more barbed, more abrasive. The other hosts around the table moved uncomfortably in their chairs. You could sense the tension building. Joy Behar, never one to be at a loss for a joke or a deflection, attempted to guide the conversation back to Jackson's new movie. But Whoopi was not releasing. "Gee, Samuel," she interrupted Joy, "I'm interested in this trend in your work. You always find yourself doing these kinds of parts that celebrate violence, that perpetuate these kinds of stereotypes." There was a pause, and then she continued, "Don't you feel, as a black actor, a sense of obligation to make better choices?" That was it. Jackson's gaze grew cold. There was a flash of astonishment, then flames. "Excuse me?" he snapped, his tone crisp, deep. You seriously questioning my roles? You think I'm betraying my race in some way? I'm not saying anything, Whoopi said, raising her voice. I'm asking straight out. When young black men see you on screen, what do you think you're sending them? The atmosphere in the studio shifted. It was as if all the sound was sucked out of the room. Even the crowd, energetic just moments before, had fallen silent. Everyone sensed something spinning out of control. Jackson slouched forward, not to scare, but to be heard unmistakably. His voice lowered into that soft, deadly register, the one that indicated the gloves had come off. Let me understand this, Whoopi, he said, deliberate and cold as ice. You're sitting here on national television, calling my integrity into question, not only as an actor, but as a black man in America. You're implying that I've spent the last 40 years in this business making destructive decisions? That my work somehow is a betrayal to my own people? I'm asking legitimate questions, Whoopi retorted. Questions I think viewers have a right to have answered. Her voice was louder now, more defensive. Jackson wasn't done. You've made millions playing characters that— What? She continued, but Jackson cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. That entertain people, he said, that tell stories, that showcase the range and depth of black talent in Hollywood. He sat back slightly, but his eyes never left hers. You want to discuss responsibility? He continued, his tone now righteous indignation. Where was this concern when you were producing Sister Act 2 or when you were presenting comic relief? Whoopi's face went red, her lips compressed. Don't you dare turn this. I'm trying to understand, Jackson said, his tone heavy with a disappointment. Why someone I've known and respected for years would choose to ambush me like this, on national television, accusing me of failing my community, questioning my character? Why now? Whoopi's hands trembled slightly. Whether from anger or nerves, it was hard to tell. I'm not ambushing anyone, she insisted. I'm asking the hard questions, the ones people are too afraid to ask. Jackson let out a dry laugh, sharp, humorless. Hard questions? He echoed. Hard questions would be about the work, the craft, the industry we've both dedicated our lives to. What you're doing is character assassination disguised as journalism. The words character assassination hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Whoopi's face twisted with rage. The careful control she maintained as a host was gone now. She leaned forward, jabbing her finger toward Jackson with fiery intensity. Don't you just sit there and pretend to be some sort of victim, she snapped. You've spent your whole career playing the angry black man, and now you want to get offended when someone critiques you for it? Jackson's eyes went cold. His voice was chillingly calm. Called out? By whom? By someone who believes they are the moral arbiter of all black actors in Hollywood? Tell me, Whoopi, who granted you that authority? Nobody gave me that, Whoopi retorted, her hands trembling. I worked for it. I've been working in this industry, fighting for change while you were still doing stage work in New York, assuming you were better than everybody else. Now the curtain was completely up. This had nothing to do with his new movie. This had nothing to do with his career. This was deeper, something old and established, perhaps years in the making. So that's what this really is about, Jackson whispered softly, his voice dropping to a whisper that filled the entire room. It's not about my jobs. It's not about how I depict the community. It's about you, your ego. You've always resented that I didn't play by your rules, didn't conform to your vision of how a black actor is supposed to be in Hollywood. Whoopi stood up suddenly, as though standing made her stronger. Threatened by you? She laughed. Please, I have an Oscar, an Emmy, a Grammy, a Tony. What could I possibly be threatened by? Jackson sat, but sitting he dominated. Perhaps it's the fact that I never needed your approval, he replied calmly. That I established my career on my own terms without playing politics. That I'm still here, still working, still relevant, without destroying other actors to feel important. The studio had gone still. Not even the crew was moving. The other hosts sat frozen like unwilling witnesses to something no one had expected. You think you're better than everyone else? Whoopi pressed, her voice cracking. Walking around Hollywood like you're untouchable, like no one's allowed to question you? Truthfully, my reputation speaks for itself, Jackson responded calmly. I don't need to tear down others to elevate myself. I don't need a platform to bring down people I've known and respected for decades. Respect? Whoopi snorted in bitter laughter. Is that what you call ignoring people? Is that what you call making yourself too good for your peers to even speak to? Making award shows seem like they're not good enough for you? At last, Jackson rose to his feet, and when he did, it was as if all the air in the room had changed. He didn't loom, he filled the room. I call it dignity, he said, his voice low but strong. I call it avoiding petty politics. In backroom deals you appear to love. If that makes me seem aloof, fine. Petty politics? Whoopi's voice rose. Is that how you describe pushing? Is that how you describe struggling for improved acting opportunities for black actors? No, Jackson replied bluntly. I call that Tuesday. He stopped, went on, his voice honed by quiet conviction. The difference is, I do it without having to make a show, without running for credit. I do it because it counts, not because I want a pat on the back at sweeps week. The line cut deep. You could see it in Whoopi's face, a palpable jolt, like a punch she hadn't prepared for. Her lips opened, closed, opened once more, and then the words at last burst out, hot, unchecked. You sanctimonious, arrogant. Careful, Jackson interrupted. His tone cut into her rage like a knife. You're on national television. Whatever you say next will haunt you for the remainder of your career. But Whoopi was beyond the point of restraint. The dam was broken. All those years of resentment and frustration boiled forth, unstoppable. Think you're so perfect, so superior, but I see who you truly are, Samuel. I hear about the on-set tantrums, the directors you've clashed with, the co-stars who can't stand to share a set with you. Jackson didn't flinch, but his wavelength changed, harsher, colder. His voice dropped even lower. Oh, is that so? He replied, unruffled as a still pond. And where? Is that where you got blow this Whoopi? Jackson asked, his tone steady but sharp. From the same folks who've been spoon-feeding you morsels of rumor, just enough to spin into allegations for this interview. She hesitated, clearly rattled. For the first time, something unsure crossed her face. Panic? Guilt? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice cracked. Oh, I think you do, Jackson replied, his gaze unwavering. This wasn't an impulse. This is an act, a calculated one. Someone's been whispering in your ear, filling your head with half-truths, prodding you into coming after me. The question is, why are you allowing them to manipulate you? Whoopi paled. No one's manipulating me, she replied hastily. These are my questions, my issues. Jackson provided a laugh that was devoid of joy. Your issues, and how long have you had them, precisely? Because we've been in the same rooms, same parties, same award shows for years. Interesting how none of that ever came to light, until the cameras were rolling and you had a crowd. The other hosts stared from one to the other, mute witnesses to something disintegrating before their eyes. You could sense it in the air. This was not merely a dispute. This was something more, and it wasn't abating. I've always had those misgivings, Whoopi maintained, even though the flames of her voice were dwindling. I simply never had the platform to discuss them. No platform? Jackson's eyebrows shot up in shock. You've been sitting around this table every day for years, Whoopi. You've had a platform the whole time, but you saw fit to make today, when I'm here to discuss a film that's important to me, your own personal war. Why today? What's really happening? No, Whoopi, he replied. I believe that criticism ought to be fair, honest, fact-based. Not personal scores to settle disguised as journalism. What you did today wasn't criticism. It was a hit job. A hit job, she repeated, her voice cracking as she tried to get back on solid ground. I'm asking real questions about your career, about the messages you're sending. Legitimate questions? Jackson's tone escalated for the first time. Controlled, but fierce. You began by telling me I'm too old to be in this business. Then you criticized my selection of parts. You questioned whether I'm a positive influence in my own community. You insinuated I'm hurting black men just by doing the work I've done for so many years. And you only refer to that as legitimate? The crowd started murmuring. Some shook their heads, obviously disturbed by what they were seeing. Others sat stiffly, mouths open, not sure whether to turn away or continue viewing the wreckage being played out. Sarah Haynes finally broke her silence, anxious and soft-spoken. Maybe we should cut to a break. No, said Jackson sternly, never taking his eyes off Whoopi. I want to know. I want to know why someone I've admired, someone I believed admired me, chose to use her show, her voice, her platform to ask me if I'm a liar and attempt to bring down my character on national television. Whoopi was panting now, fighting to maintain an even voice. Whoopi, she said at last, because I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from seeing you ride your reputation while younger, better talent is passed over. I'm exhausted from Hollywood giving you parts that could be given to fresh talent, talent that's hungry. Jackson's head cocked a little bit, unruffled, measured. Younger talent, such as who? He inquired. Tell me. Name them. Tell me who you think would do my parts and why they deserve it more. The room fell silent once more. You could practically hear the cameras clicking away. Whoopi's mouth opened to respond, but words failed her. She hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't assumed she'd be pushed so bluntly. That's what I thought, Jackson said quietly. This isn't about representation. It's not about uplifting others or providing opportunity. You're wrapping those lofty causes around something else. This is about you, something personal, something that's obviously been brewing for some time. I don't have a personal problem with you, Whoopi said, but her voice was weak now. Fire behind the words had turned to ash. Then explain this, Jackson said, sweeping his arm around the studio. Explain the ambush. Explain the attack on my career. Explain why you did it now of all times, to challenge my life's work. He stopped, his tone firm and sorrowful. If this isn't personal, Whoopi, then what is it? Whoopi looked around the studio as if she were viewing it for the first time. The cameras continued to roll, recording each moment of her disintegrating. Crowd looked at her with a combination of shock and respectful disapproval. Her fellow co-hosts did not look in her direction. Some gazed at the floor, others into the distance. She had cornered herself, and there was no dignified exit. I just think, she started, her words little more than a whisper. I just think actors like you have an obligation to use their influence more judiciously. Jackson didn't blink. And you've assumed the judgment seat about that, he asked. On what basis? What qualifies you to know how wisely I make use of my influence? Who are you to judge my career or my decisions? Each question struck home. She had entered into this believing she would dominate the conversation, perhaps even reveal what she perceived as contradictions or weaknesses in Jackson's career. But instead, she was being patiently and relentlessly dismantled by someone with decades of resume to her name and a rock-solid sense of self. The silence hung between them. And when Whoopi again spoke, the tone had altered. It was softer, yes, but colder, edgier. Do you know what your problem is, Samuel? She told him. You think you're above everyone. You think because you've had success and made money, that means you're above criticism. Jackson shook his head, slowly, convincingly. I call it calling you out, Whoopi retorted. But even she didn't sound like she believed it anymore. Accountable to who? Jackson asked, letting out a harsh laugh. To you? I'm accountable to my family, to my craft, to the people who spend their hard-earned money to watch my work. That's it. I'm not accountable to someone who came in here with a grudge and decided today was the day to settle it on live TV. Sonny Hostin attempted to interrupt, voice hesitant and soft. Perhaps we can steer the conversation in a more positive direction. No, said Jackson, holding up his hand to silence her. I'm going to complete this. I want everyone who is watching to watch very carefully what occurred here. He faced Whoopi again, eyes firm, voice biting with controlled anger. From the time I stepped onto this stage, you had an agenda. You did not want to have a conversation. You wanted to destroy me. You assumed I'd just sit there and allow it to occur. I asked you to come in here and have a truthful conversation, Whoopi protested, but her voice shook. Honest? Jackson's tone dropped once more, low and level, and the sort of level that precedes something erupting. There's been no honest in this, not your questions, not your motives, not the way you constructed this interview. Then with measured, deliberate action, he reached up and unclipped the microphone from his lapel. The sound of that mic going off sent a shiver through the room. Everyone present knew exactly what it represented. Samuel, wait, Joy Behar said quickly, her voice full of panic. Let's just take a step back. No, Joy, Jackson said, never taking his eyes off Whoopi. There's no stepping back from what happened here crossed a line. This wasn't TV, this wasn't entertainment. It was an ambush, and I'm not going to stay and pretend otherwise. Whoopi seemed to realize what was about to happen. You don't have to whoa, she said. We can conclude the interview properly. Conclude it properly? Jackson rose, placing the mic on his vacant seat. How do you conclude something that was never supposed to be fair to begin with? How do you finish a conversation with a person who arrived dressed for combat but disguised it in a friendly welcome? The cameras continued to roll, recording each second of what would stand as one of the most iconic moments in the history of talk shows. Samuel L. Jackson simply smoothed his jacket, composure firmly restored. His voice echoed in the hushed studio, rock steady and unflappable. I've been doing this business 40 years, he told her. I've dealt with troublesome directors, endured grueling interviews, even had co-stars turn on me. But I've never, in 40 years, had some person treat me with such blatant disrespect who should have known better. Whoopi's face was red now. Perhaps it was anger. Perhaps it was embarrassment. Perhaps it was a little of both. You're being too dramatic, she said hastily. This is just a discussion between coworkers. Colleagues? She turned to him, finally, one last time. Colleagues treat each other with respect. Colleagues don't lay traps on national TV, and they don't use their form to settle past grievances. He turned to exit, moving slowly towards the periphery of the set, then stopped. You know what the saddest part is, Whoopi? His tone changed, but it was still carrying. I respected you. I respected your work, your voice, your activism. I thought we were friends, or at least two professionals who respected each other. We are, said Whoopi, her voice breaking. We are. This does not have to end like this. Jackson shook his head, exhausted. It ended the second you determined I was the bad guy in whatever narrative you've been living in your head. The second you believed destroying me would elevate you. The rest of the hosts remained unmoving in their seats, staring. Even the studio staff had frozen. Jackson breathed deeply. I hope this was worth it, he told her softly. I hope whatever it is you were attempting to do here, torching this bridge, embarrassing yourself on national TV, was worth indulging whatever it is you've been nursing. Samuel, please. Whoopi's voice had all but no sound now. Please what? Jackson asked, shifting slightly. Please continue to pretend this never happened. Please make this the way you treat someone you say you respect. He shook his head again. I have too much self-respect for that. He turned and began walking toward the exit. His steps were measured, calm, but they left behind a storm. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Whoopi suddenly shouted. You can't handle any criticism, any challenge to your perfect image. You're proving my point by walking away. Jackson stopped. Slowly he turned back, and when he did speak, his voice was cool, crisp, and as cutting as glass. No, Whoopi, I'm demonstrating I'm aware of the distinction between criticism and character assassination. I'm demonstrating I possess sufficient self-respect not to sit here and be verbally assaulted, simply to provide entertainment for your audience or satisfy your ego. And I'm demonstrating that sometimes the strongest thing a human can do is simply walk away from someone else's dysfunction. The silence that ensued was so thick, it was as if the breath had been drawn from the room.